Howdy, folks. Why did the Virgin Mary remain a virgin even after she gave birth to Jesus Christ? It's an interesting question, and it can be answered on more than one level. It can be answered on a human level, and it can be answered on a divine level. Let's talk about the human level first. According to one understanding of Mary's virginity, she had originally been planning an ordinary marriage with Saint Joseph, to whom she was already betrothed, already legally married, and she was expecting, like any young betrothed woman in Israel in her day, to one day begin cohabiting with her husband and then to have children in the ordinary manner. According to this understanding, that plan was altered when the angel Gabriel appeared to her and told her that she would bear a son, and in fact that she would be bearing God's son. And in the wake of that astonishing announcement, Joseph and Mary altered their plans and planned at that point on a continent marriage, a marriage where they did not have children other than the Son of God whom Mary bore. This is one understanding of why Mary remained a virgin even after the birth of Christ, that it was the momentousness of having God's own Son in her womb that led her to choose not to have any other sons in her womb. But this is not the only understanding of the situation. In fact, it's not the earliest understanding. The earliest understanding we have of this question is expressed in the 2nd century, in the AD 100s. You can find it in a document known as the Protoevangelium of James. It's also sometimes called the Infancy Gospel of James. And according to this document, which is not part of the Bible, it's not part of the canon, but it nevertheless may preserve some accurate historical traditions about Jesus' family. According to this document, Mary's parents, St. Joachim and Anne, were infertile. Like a lot of people in the Old Testament, or a lot of people today, they experienced the pain of childlessness. And so they prayed to God, and He gave them a daughter. He gave them Mary. And like other people in biblical days, they made a vow about their child. You may remember, for example, at the beginning of the book of 1 Samuel, when Samuel's mother Hannah is experiencing childlessness, she prays to God for a child, and she vows the child, Samuel, to a consecrated life. According to the Protoevangelium of James, that's what Joachim and Anne did. They vowed their child, Mary, to a consecrated life. And so she was, according to this understanding from the 2nd century, a consecrated virgin. And thus, that's why she remained a virgin. She was leading a consecrated life. Now, she did eventually become espoused to St. Joseph because as a young woman in that time and era, she needed to be married for social reasons. She needed a caretaker. And so, according to the Protoevangelium of James, an elderly widower who already had a family named Joseph was selected to be her guardian. And so he was not planning on having an ordinary marriage with her. He'd already had an ordinary marriage, and his wife had died. He wasn't expecting to have new children. He already had children. And in fact, according to the Protoevangelium of James, those were the so-called brethren of the Lord that we read about in the New Testament. They weren't half-brothers through Joseph. They were step-brothers from Joseph's previous marriage. There's also an interesting aspect of what Mary says to Gabriel in Luke's Gospel that may have a bearing on this. If you remember the passage where Gabriel appears to Mary and tells her that she's going to conceive and have a son, she doesn't immediately say, "Oh, great." Instead, she says, "How will this be? For I know not man." Well, she's already legally married. She's just waiting for the period of cohabitation to begin. She obviously knows the facts of life, or she wouldn't ask the question. And so if she were planning an ordinary marriage, then you would expect her to not ask this question. You'd expect her to assume that what would happen, like any other young woman in Israel, once she begins cohabiting with her husband, the two of them will have marital relations and she'll get pregnant, and that's how she'll have the son. But she doesn't expect that, it seems. She doesn't seem to be expecting an ordinary marriage. And that coheres with the picture that's presented in the Protoevangelium of James. So there are a couple of ways you can explain why Mary remained a virgin even after the birth of Christ on the human level. The first explanation, as we saw, was that she decided having God's own son was so momentous that she would forego having other sons, or it could be because she was vowed to a consecrated life, and so she simply continued to live a consecrated life even after the birth of Jesus. These are answers that operate on the human level, but it's also possible to answer the question on the divine level. In other words, why would God think it fitting to choose a virgin and a perpetual virgin to be the mother of his son? Well, it seems to me that the logical explanation is the same reason that he would choose to have a virgin be the mother of his son in the first place. It shows that this is indeed a miraculous child, and the fact that this child has no human father points to the fact that God is his father. And so the fact that Jesus has no human father indicates that he's God's son. It's a pretty clear demonstration of that, in fact. And so, consequently, given that situation, it would also be fitting for Mary to remain a virgin afterwards, because that just underscores the point that this is God's son, not man's son. She, in fact, had no other sons by man. If she had, then people could always say, well, okay, we know she had other sons in the ordinary manner. Maybe she and St. Joseph got together a little earlier. But the fact that she never had any sons, from a divine perspective, underscores the point that Jesus has no human father, not even St. Joseph. He's his foster father, and consequently, he really is God's son. If you like the information I've presented here, I hope you'll join my Secret Information Club. In case you're not familiar with it, the Secret Information Club is a free service that I operate by email. I send out fascinating information about the Catholic faith, and in fact, the very first thing you'll get when you sign up is information from former Pope Benedict about what the Book of Revelation means. He has some very interesting things to say, and if you'd like to find out what they are, you should sign up at www.secretinfoclub.com. Thank you.